Free audio post-production by alphonic.com.
So imagine you and your partner are in the same room, and the silence between you just feels so physical and so strong because you just had that same fight, quote unquote, for the hundredth time. You know, the one that starts with a late text and then ends with, "You don't love me anymore."
Welcome to part 2 of our relationship deep dive. In our last episode, we gave you the Pattern Explorer prompt to map out your specific relationship cycle. And today, we're going to explain the why behind the prompt and the concept it's built on, emotionally focused therapy, EFT. After this episode, though, you're going to learn to recognize your own relationship cycle and know that it's the real enemy, not your partner.
This is the AI Therapy Podcast,
Where we discuss mindful use of AI for self-help. A consumer insights nerd
and a techie are joined by a practicing psychologist to unpack when AI can be helpful, where it shouldn't be used, and best ways to interact with AI to get the support you need. AI Therapy Podcast, practical tools, real talk, and a mindful take on technology. Welcome back, everyone. If you haven't listened to episode 7 yet, I would highly recommend that you go back to that one first. In that episode, we walk you through our relationship pattern explorer prompt piece by piece. If you're just joining us today for the first time, I'm sure you can still relate. Last time we mentioned that on average, couples wait 6 years of distress before they finally seek help. That is 6 years of having the same fight over and over and over again. The promising part, though, is that data shows that 70% of couples who use EFT, the concept on which our prompt is built, and the science of which we're covering today, they report real improvement, moving from constant state of anxiety to a state of stability. So let's start today's episode a little different. We will start with rapid fire. We've prepared 5 questions for Nate that we will run through really quickly. So these are the questions that people actually search for about relationship and relationship patterns. So Nate, we'll ask you the questions and you need to provide quick answers, which I know can be challenging.
I will do my very best.
Okay, amazing. All right, question number 1. Why do we keep having the same fight?
Because unresolved needs trigger a defense response. So the topic and content changes. On the surface, it feels that people argue about dishes, money, texting, but it's actually what these things mean to them and the feelings that they trigger that at the core of these fights. So that's why they keep on coming back because the underlying needs never get addressed.
Okay. So the second question, why does my partner shut down?
Well, there is so many reasons behind it, but I guess the most common one, or one of the most common ones, is the overwhelm or flooding, the way we call it, that happens in one of the partners. And it's not indifference. It's not indifference. It's just sometimes that their nervous system has hit its capacity and shut down is a protective response. So it usually comes from a place of, you know what, I never get it right, so I'll just stop trying before I make it worse.
Right, right. And I guess question 3 is the flip side of that is, why do I get so reactive?
Well, I mean, quite often it's your nervous system that is registering the threat. Your nervous system is responding to something that it perceives as emotional danger, and with the same intensity it would use for a physical danger.
Mhm.
Okay. And then next question probably relates to what a lot of people may think when they're having these type of discussions is, are we just incompatible?
Often it's actually not about compatibility at all. What often looks like incompatibility is usually a needs mismatch. And this needs mismatch sometimes becomes entrenched in couples dynamic. So the way we approach it, if you remember from a previous episode, we referred to it as pursuer and withdrawer. So pursuer withdrawer aren't incompatible. They are actually complementary systems that have gotten stuck.
And the final question, can I fix my relationship on my own?
You cannot fix relationship on your own. However, what you can do, and the modest goal of our prompt here, is to at least understand your part in this cycle and try to take ownership of your part. That can definitely contribute to, to some improvements in the relationship.
Okay, that was fun. So, Nate, let's start at the foundation. As I mentioned before, our prompt is built on something called EFT, emotionally focused therapy. Can you walk us through what that is? And also, most importantly, why did you choose it for our prompt?
Yeah. So, as you said, EFT stands for emotionally focused therapy, and it was developed by Dr. Sue Johnson and Dr. Les Greenberg, starting, let's say, in mid 1980s. So, Sue Johnson was a very prominent Canadian psychologist, and I was even lucky enough to give a seminar with her in Montreal on how to use EFT with same sex couples. So now it's one of the most well researched and effective approaches to couples therapy, widely used in the world. Let's say about 70, and that is what's impressive about it. That's what I like about it, that about 70 to 75% of couples who go through EFT tend to show improvements, quite often significant improvements, where they move from distressed to recovered status in their couples. And what's also good is that quite often the changes introduced by EFT are sustainable, they tend to last. Which is significant because a lot of other couple interventions show improvement quite often in the short term, but not long lasting changes.
Okay, so you dabbled in terms of like how it shows improvements and it might be a little bit different than other approaches, but can you elaborate on that a little bit more in terms of what makes it different from other approaches as well?
EFT starts from a very different premise. It says the problem isn't that you don't know how to communicate. The problem is that you don't feel safe enough to communicate what you really feel. And until safety is established at the emotional level in the couple, no amount of skill building is going to stick.
So, I guess just to paraphrase then, what you're saying is it's not really about learning the right words per se, but it's rather about feeling safe enough in your relationship to allow yourself to be vulnerable and honest.
Exactly, exactly. So, from EFT's point of view, emotional bond between partners is the foundation of the relationship. So, when that bond feels secure, when both people feel like they can reach for each other and their partner will be there, conflict is manageable. When the bond feels threatened, though, even small conflicts become existential. Because, as we said before, it's not about the dishes, it's about, are you there for me? Do I matter to you?
Right. And just like a quick plug, we really go deep on this in the last episode, explaining why it's not about the dishes, but about the bond. So,
Right.
really do highly recommend you go listen to that.
Okay, but focusing back on what Nate was just talking about, it kind of makes me think about attachment theory. I'm guessing you guys,
Mm-hmm.
it's one of those mainstream words or phrases. I feel like most people have heard about it, but may not really know too much about it. So, how does that tie into this?
Well, Eric, you might actually be surprised how not mainstream it is.
Hmm.
A lot of the couples and individuals that come to see me quite often never heard of attachment theory. And it's so brilliant and it's so foundational in understanding our relational dynamics that for a lot of folks it's very eye-opening. So for when it comes to EFT, that's the engine of the whole model. EFT is really grounded in attachment theory. Our need for close emotional bonds is hardwired individuals.
Right. Okay. So I think this is interesting. When we discussed our prompt last week, you were very careful the about not using fixed labels from attachment theory. And we asked AI not to do that, right? So we asked AI not to categorize or label our partner as avoidant or anxious or whatnot. Why was that so intentional?
It's very important because the attachment styles are not fixed. So, one of the biggest contributions of EFT research is showing that attachment tendencies can change. specifically, they can change within the context of a relationship. So you're not born with an anxious attachment style and stuck there forever. You develop attachment strategies based on what you've experienced starting in early childhood. And then they translate themselves into adult relationships. So those strategies can shift when the relational context shifts.
Right. So I guess it's more like, here is what I tend to do when I'm under stress rather than here is who I am forever.
Exactly. So the prompt we built is very deliberate about this. As we discussed in last episode, it described tendencies, not types, and we ask it very explicitly to not label attachment styles and individuals within those attachment styles.
Speaking about tendencies, can you walk us through some tendencies and what does it actually look like?
Well, I mean, when attachment bond feels threatened, when we question if we are loved or valued by our partner, when we feel disconnected or uncertain about our partner's availability for us, we tend to respond in one of a few predictable ways. So some folks try to achieve relational safety by pursuing their partner. So they reach for connection. But quite often the problem is that it is perceived as criticism and nagging sometimes.
Hmm.
And often it can play itself out as following their partner from room to room, bringing up the past, saying things like you never or you always are like this. Absolute terms like that, right? So in EFT, this is called pursuing. And under the surface, the pursuing partner is usually experiencing something like, you know what? I'm actually scared you don't care about me. I'm scared I don't matter to you. I need you to respond to me so I know we are okay.
Okay, yeah, no, that definitely makes sense. And I'm just thinking back to our last episode where there was that conversation between Quinn messaging Alex and kind of like pursuing in that manner. And that was really Quinn's need for connection.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. And on the other end of the spectrum, there are folks that move away from the threat to feel safer. They withdraw, they look for space, they go silent. And in EFT, this way of protecting yourself is called withdrawing. So, under the surface, the withdrawing partner is usually experiencing something like, you know what, I feel like I can never get it right. I'm never going to be good enough for you. So in that example that Eric brought up from the last episode, when Alex got home and got a cold treatment from Queen, he just withdrew by going to his room without engaging in further conversation. That's how he defended himself.
Right. So I think what I'm taking away from here is that both people are in pain, both people are scared, but they're ultimately expressing it in two completely opposite ways.
Mhm.
And that's the tragedy of most of relationship distress that I see in my clinical work. So the problem is that when folks are stuck in their end of the cycle, they're so hurt that they can't see each other's pain because the way each one of them protects themselves is the exact thing that triggers the other. And in EFT, this is exactly what we call the cycle, what we've been using to describe this dynamic negative interaction cycle.
And building on the prompt from our last episode, so once you map those moves, you can actually shift from blaming your partner and realize that this is really a predictable cycle, and that's ultimately the real enemy, not each other.
Okay, so now that we've covered EFT and attachment theory, I want to talk about another aspect of the prompt, the primary and secondary emotions. And this was one of the core design elements in the prompt.
So in EFT, we distinguish between secondary emotions and primary emotions. Secondary emotions are the ones that show up on the surface most readily in relational conflict. Anger, irritation, frustration, numbness, contempt, all that type of stuff. And don't get me wrong, they are real, they are valid, but they are usually not standalone feelings or emotions. They are usually a reaction to a deeper, more vulnerable feeling. So, primary emotions are those deeper, more vulnerable feelings that are causing the secondary emotions. They are what's underneath things like fear, sadness, loneliness, shame. feeling inadequate, the terror of being abandoned or not mattering to your partner. So these are the emotions that are harder to access and that feel more dangerous to disclose to your partner when in conflict. And of course, sometimes even harder to recognize in yourself because it feels so threatening.
Can we use maybe Alex and Quinn as an example?
Let's go back to Queen. So when Alex doesn't text, he feels angry. So he thinks you never think about me. I'm always last on your list. That anger is real, but it's a secondary emotion in that case. Underneath the anger in this case is the fear that he doesn't matter to his partner. And underneath the fear is a deep need, the need to know, do I matter to you? Am I important to you? If Queen says the angry thing, you never think about me. It sounds maybe critical or angry. Alex's nervous system, though, hears an attack, a criticism, and the problem is that instead of meeting Queen's needs, Alex shuts down, and then the cycle escalates. But what can disarm the cycle is if Queen could access the primary emotion and say, when I don't hear from you, I get scared that I don't matter to you. That's a completely different message. The defense comes down in that case. Alex's nervous system hears vulnerability, not attack. And vulnerability actually invites connection rather than defensiveness.
Okay. So, of course, the prompt is super useful and we hope everyone will use it. But outside of the prompt, are there any practical tools that our listeners can try today?
Yeah, there are a couple things that I really like to share with clients. So, first is the vulnerability translation. After a fight, when things have cooled down, try to ask yourself, what was I actually feeling underneath the anger or the shutdown? Did I feel the loneliness, shame? Can I name that to my partner? What are the stakes here? What's the worst thing that can happen? Even saying to partner, and of course, if that feels safe, I think underneath my frustration, I was actually scared I don't matter to you, can open a completely different conversation.
Right. And I do want to call out that our prompt was specifically designed to help you get to this. It's not going to tell you what you're feeling, but it's going to do its best to guide you to dig deeper and identify what that primary emotion is.
Mhm.
And another hard one, but very useful, is actually naming the cycle. So when you name this cycle, you understand that it's the cycle that's the problem, not your partner. So next time you're in a conflict, try saying, you know what, I think we're in our cycle right now. So even that one sentence shifts both of you sometimes from inside the fight to outside of it.
Now, let's talk about why AI is genuinely well suited to several specific things in this space. So, first, AI is well structured for this because it can help you with structured reflection after a conflict. So, when you're still activated after a fight, it's really, really hard to think clearly, as all of you have experienced before. But having this prompt will slow you down, slow things down. It'll ask you to separate what happened from what you made it mean. And it helps you move from secondary to primary emotions. And that structured reflection is hard to do alone at midnight when you're still spinning and fuming, of course.
Right. That's a good one. I have another one. So it's about pattern recognition, right? And Nathan Herrick just talked about it a second ago. But most people can't see their own cycle from the inside. So the prompt really helps you step outside of that cycle and kind of observe as an observer to see the loop from above. That's the beginning of that change.
That's really important. Another really important thing is that it will actually teach you and expand your emotional vocabulary. So, a lot of people find it really hard to name what they're feeling beyond basic things like anger or being upset. So, this prompt's going to help expand that vocabulary, which will make it possible for you to communicate more precisely about what you're really feeling.
Another reason is self awareness and around those attachment tendencies, right? So, understanding objectively whether you tend to pursue or withdraw when you're under stress and w- and like what that tendency is in service of, right? What are you trying to accomplish is very, very powerful self-knowledge. It gives you more choice on how you can respond next time you're in the same situation under the same stress.
Okay. And similarly, but I guess in a different vein, is the last point I'm going to make here is really around pre-conversation preparation. So again, preparation, it's like, how you study for a test or whenever you are about to do something you may find difficult. So before you do something difficult or you're going to have a difficult conversation with your partner, you can use the tool to think it through. So you can have that conversation, be like, okay, what am I actually feeling? What do I need? And how might my partner hear what I'm about to say? That preparation can really help you say the right things and reduce any possible negative escalations.
I guess it's like having a calm, patient thinking partner at 11 p.m. when you're still spinning from a fight and, your actual partner is in another room and you can't really talk to them.
Yeah.
Okay, but Nate, we always want to be honest about the limits. Now that we've covered the benefits, where should AI not be used?
This is really, really important. And we did put a lot of that in the prompt as well. So you will see all the instructions we give AI about it not being used during the conflict. When two people are activated and escalate in real time, introducing AI into the dynamic can very possibly make things worse. So in that case, the situation needs a human, ideally a therapist.
Wait, so you're meaning when I'm having a conversation, oh, sorry, when I'm having an argument with my significant other, I shouldn't be like, hey, babe, wait a second. I'm going to whip out my iPhone or Android and get my bot to back me up here. Not a good idea.
Exactly, exactly. That might not be helpful.
Okay.
And as we discussed in the last episode, for now, as far as we can tell, AI cannot do couples therapy. It just helps you understand your side of the story. You know, AI can actually be quite unhelpful because it might be validating your part if not prompted properly and making your partner sound like a villain. And of course, and that we put a lot in the prompt to because that's a very important part. AI should never be used when physical violence is present. In that case, you really need to seek professional help immediately. Do not rely on AI in that case.
Right. And I guess that's a good place for us to wrap up. I think this was such a great discussion. Honestly, guys, I am so excited about this tool. It's free, so let's get it out to more people. And as always, do we want to do a quick roundtable with our highlights?
Sounds good.
All right.
I'll go first. For me, it's actually my realization that my reactions when I'm in a conflict aren't random and they're not, really flaws per se. They're just my nervous system doing exactly what it learned to do. And once I know that and am able to see that, I can make a better choice the next time.
Right. I guess for me, from this episode, is something that Nate actually said pretty early on. It's not about learning the right words, right? It's about feeling safe enough to be vulnerable. And that was a real aha moment for me. So, no amount of communication technique fixes a relationship where, both people feel emotionally unsafe.
Exactly. So, yes, exactly. Relationship challenges are not communication problems. They are connection problems, and that's the key here. So the goal isn't to fight less. Of course, that's the desired outcome, but the goal is to feel safer with each other. And that starts with understanding what's actually happening beneath the words, beneath the obvious emotions. In either way, the fact that you listen to this episode and you're thinking about this, especially if it applies to your situation, that's what matters. That's already a first step.
Thank you for listening, everyone. If this
resonated, share it with someone who needs it. I'm sure we all do. The prompt is in the show notes, as always. And we'll see you in the next episode.
Thanks for joining us today. Just a quick reminder before you go. Please remember this episode is educational and not a substitute for professional care, and listening does not create a therapist-client relationship. If you are in immediate danger or at risk of harming yourself or someone else, please call your local emergency number right away or contact a crisis line right now. All right, we'll see you in the next episode.
Free audio post-production by hundredth.com.